A very good morning, everyone. Welcome to Mansion House. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm editor-at-large at Reuters, and I will be guiding us through the first couple of sessions of a busy but fascinating morning agenda. A couple of very quick housekeeping points. We're not expecting a fire alarm, but if you hear a continuous ringing, do evacuate by the nearest exit, which is that one there. The Wi-Fi, I think it's up on the screens. The network is financing with a capital F. The password is Future23, also with a capital F. I will keep this open brief, as I know the Lord Mayor will also help set the scene for today's discussions in just a moment. But given that I wear a news hat, do allow me to provide a little bit of news context for today. India is, of course, in the international spotlight for several reasons right now. First, it holds the G20 presidency this year, a moment of complex geopolitical and economic challenge. This does, though, present India with an opportunity to help shape an international response to multiple crises. Good timing, many say, for Prime Minister Modi ahead of next May's general elections. And of course, it's been hard to miss coverage of Prime Minister Modi's recent 3-day trip to the US. President Biden talked of a booming economic relationship. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, in a speech last week, singled out India's infrastructure investments and the efforts being made to help India attract more private sector capital to close the infrastructure gap. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is of course very much the subject of today's event here at Mansion House, getting private capital to work. How can and how will the City of London and the UK help provide the partnerships, the private finance, the capital investment needed to deliver sustainable infrastructure in India? How to match the demand, if you like, those projects in India in need of capital investment with the desire here for solid, sustainable investment opportunities. Okay, enough from me. It gives me great pleasure, first up, to invite Nicholas Lyons, the Lord Mayor of London, for his opening remarks. I believe the idea for today's summit grew from meetings the Lord Mayor had in India earlier this year. Lord Mayor, coming up.
Your Excellency, my Lord, Aldermen, ladies and gentlemen, a very, very warm welcome to London and to the mayoral residence, Mansion House, for the UK-India Infrastructure Summit. For those who don't know me, my name is Nicholas Lyons. I am the 694th Lord Mayor of London, and I head up the Square Miles governing body, the City of London Corporation, and I act as an ambassador for UK financial and professional services and for London as a global financial centre. So on behalf of everyone at the City of London Corporation, thank you for joining us today at this critical juncture in the UK-India partnership during India Global Forum's UK-India Week, and at a time when investment in infrastructure is so high on the agenda, with the Prime Minister Modi traveling to the US just last week to discuss what support US investors can offer to fill India's infrastructure gap. India is one of the UK's most valued economic and cultural partners, and we're cementing our relationship further via the 2030 Roadmap for India-UK, Future Relations and Free Trade Agreement. In April, India's population overtook that of China, and it is expected to be the fastest growing major economy in 2023. Sustainable infrastructure is critical for India's economic trajectory to meet the needs of its fast growing population while fulfilling its ambition to reach net zero by 2070. The current Indian budget has provided for a massive push on infrastructure, with a 33% increase in government contributions to $122 billion per annum, announced in February. But India's infrastructure ambitions can't be achieved by domestic sources of financing alone. With strong government backing and unparalleled global expertise in sustainable finance and infrastructure financing solutions, the City of London and the UK can help India to access one of the largest and most diversified global capital pools on the best possible terms, and should be the partner of choice as India builds a new sustainable future. It's an issue which the CEO of Niti Aayog and I discussed during a fantastic trip to India in March, where I was struck by the scale, the ambition, and the pace of development, all aligned with a net zero future. And I'm delighted that BVR is here with us today. It's great to see you with us. And building on those discussions, I'm delighted to convene this group today to examine two key questions. Firstly, what are the obstacles preventing city capital investing in Indian sustainable infrastructure? And secondly, how can the city help advise India on structuring and delivering projects to attract overseas capital? My colleagues have put together a packed agenda for you today, which includes broad discussions of the issues and some more technical sector-specific panels. I encourage you all to share ideas and make the new connections that could help close India's infrastructure gap. Thank you once again for attending today. I hope you have an interesting and productive day, and I'm very excited to hear what comes out of it all. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Mayor. Professor Manoj Ladwar is the CEO of the India Global Forum. Notably, Manoj is a non-executive director of India Infrastructure Finance Company UK and chairs its risk committee. He will be the first of three keynote speakers before we get into some more panel discussions. Manoj, come on up.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Lord Mayor, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends. I would like to start by thanking the Lord Mayor and the City of London for coinciding with this summit with India Global Forum's annual UK India Week, and so graciously hosting this important and timely discussion for both our nations. And that too, in this most magnificent of settings. So thank you. The city plays a preeminent role in the global financial world. It has over the decades played its role as a major source of finance backed by world-class professional advisory services for India, its companies, and its projects. This summit therefore serves to underline that special bond, dare I say, masala bond, between our two great nations. Throughout India's G20 presidency, we have seen a strong affirmation of the urgent need for the major economies of the world to place sustainability at the center of their economic development agenda. And in this regard, many roads, many bridges, and digital highways being built in India do and will continue to lead to the City of London. By aligning our financial systems with our values, we can direct capital towards investments that deliver long-term social and environmental benefits. And friends, I say with confidence that there is no place like India where a pound invested can have such a profound impact, literally, for the future of our world. India is already making remarkable strides in this direction. The government of India has committed to reduce India's total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030, significantly reduce carbon intensity by the end of this decade, and achieve overall net zero carbon emissions by 2070. But as has been said earlier, India will not be able to do this alone, and it can do it faster. India requires around $20 billion pounds annually of foreign direct investment in the renewable sector alone. As the fastest growing major economy in the world and the most populous, India has huge aspirations and equally huge responsibilities. The rapid building of high-quality, sustainable physical and digital infrastructure will be critical to achieving India's ambitious growth trajectory and balancing its net zero commitments. I'm confident that the UK and India, with the firepower of the City of London, can purposely unlock the full potential for a sustainable and prosperous future for both our nations. And as I said yesterday at our opening session of India Global Forum at the Queen Elizabeth Centre, when India Global Forum started this journey several years ago, we had one purpose: to play our role as a catalyst for unleashing the full potential of this partnership. And that purpose remains true today. I believe that together we can create a lasting legacy that benefits future generations, leaving behind a world that is greener, safer, smarter, and more equitable. So friends, we have put together an enriching program that I'm sure will open up the prospect for many fruitful partnerships. And so in welcoming you all, and especially our guests from India, I encourage you all to seize this opportunity, an opportunity that can literally change the course of history. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. We have two speakers now who can help provide important perspective on the UK-India partnership, its potential and its direction. First up, Vikram Doraiswamy, who has been India's High Commissioner in the UK since September last year. He has spent over 30 years in the Indian Foreign Service with assignments in Hong Kong, Beijing, New York, and Johannesburg. High Commissioner, come on up, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. Lord Mayor, my Lord Dadia, distinguished aldermen, lords, ladies and gentlemen, particularly warm welcome to my old friend, the CEO of Niti Aayog, BVR Subramaniam, who's come up all the way for this event. And of course, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here, in particular, those of you who represent Sirius Wealth. Infrastructure is powering the transformation of India today, and it is one of the most crucial pieces of what our government is striving to achieve in the transformation of India. In particular, we have rolled out, and this was announced by the Prime Minister in 2019, the National Infrastructure Pipeline. That puts in place a pipeline of some, and I want to get the statistics correct, some 9,000 projects in it as on date, with a 5-year tagline of from 2020 to 2025, with the intention of generating, or the need to generate, something like $1.9 trillion worth of funding. The government has, as the Lord Mayor mentioned, already set out and made clear its intention to do its bit to meet some of that funding requirement. Our investment, our allocations, budgetary allocations towards infrastructure have gone up to 3.3% of GDP, which is a significant uptick on all previous years. States in our federal system are being encouraged to co-finance a lot of this. But all of this is going to require a significant amount of international funding. And so, why should you be funding the development of India. Why is this relevant? And what are the markers that you should be looking for? Not so long ago, a series of studies have put out the 10 major changes that are visible in India. And I'd like to focus on that, to leave the floor thereafter for my colleague to set out what exactly should be the markers that you should look for when you look at investment. The first is supply-side policy reforms. I think if you look at India today, corporate tax is now at levels matching or below its peers. In fact, if your businesses are to start manufacturing before next year, they will actually be below many of India's peers, the tax rates. Investment in infrastructure is already up at an unprecedented level. If you were to look at investment in all sorts of infrastructure, from broadband infrastructure to roads, rail and highways, and ports, every one of these indicators is up on in some cases at geometric levels beyond what it was 10 years ago. The second is formalization of the economy. The Indian economy is now not only collecting more by way of goods and services tax, but also through digital transactions. From less than 4.4% of GDP in 2015, digital transactions today account for 76% of GDP. Some 9 billion transactions take place per month now, and the pace is increasing. The third is real estate. The Real Estate Regulation and Development Act has also helped formalize the real estate market, and this is leading to a huge push in investment in real estate. The fourth, digital social transfers. Direct transfer of benefits to beneficiaries below the poverty line has essentially gone up from less than 10 billion rupees a year in 2013-2014 to about 2,500 billion rupees a year in cash alone, and another 3,500 billion rupees a year in in-kind schemes. The fifth is insolvency and bankruptcy code and an alternate set of alternate dispute resolution mechanisms. What this means is that the process by which the courts were being congested with cases is now being decongested by creating fora for business disputes to be taken outside the old traditional court system. The sixth, which should matter to those of you who look at these figures, flexible inflation targeting. There is increasingly a gap between what the Fed does and what the Reserve Bank of India does. This gives you a bit of a sense of the greater fiscal space that the Indian economy today has. Indeed, if you look at the COVID period, you will recognize that India was one of the few large economies that did not actually put in huge amounts of stimulus money, thereby pump-priming inflation. The seventh, focus on FDI. Gross FDI has gone up from around 30 billion in the 2005 period to around 350 billion now. This means that MNC sentiment is at an all-time high. Those who chart these things, and of course these are intangibles, but I would still say you can actually see palpably greater interest in the Indian market. The penultimate point I'd like to make is that there is considerable support today, evidence today, to see how the Indian household is transferring its savings affection, so to speak, from physical assets to more complex financial products, equities, bonds, etc. This means that the markets are more liquid, and the capacity for you to find partners for investment are also that much more diverse. Why does all of this matter? It matters because the transformation of India today cannot be done, ladies and gentlemen, purely by building bricks and mortar roads or by increasing the capacity of our ports. We are going to need to do this in a way that is environmentally friendly and environmentally sustainable. Today, 40% of our generated power comes from renewable sources. This is 7 years in advance of our commitment to do so at the Paris COP. But to make the next 10% shift, we will need not only substantially more in terms of investment in renewable power, for instance, but also in the form of technology for storage, because that jump away from baseload power that comes from hydrocarbon sources is not going to happen without significant doses of investment and increased capacities in terms of technology. So too in sustainable agriculture, so too in sustainable transportation solutions, indeed, so too in the totality of our social life. By that I mean, if India continues to urbanize at the current pace, the way that China did, then we will have a significant challenge ahead of us for the rest of the globe. So the rural transformation of India and sustainable urbanization are also going to be big-ticket pieces of the piece ahead. I say all of this, ladies and gentlemen, not to alarm you by the scale of the challenge, but to underline in my final point why it matters that India and the United Kingdom work together and why the City of London does so in particular. Your square mile represents the most extraordinary historic collection of talent, capital, and experience in investing money behind good causes. The cause of investing in India has never been a better cause. There is, in other words, no better reason for you to invest in India, not just for profit, but also for the social benefit and the environmental benefit for the totality of our planet. And I would argue that your interests are best served in aligning with ours, in making sure that the transformation of India happens in a way that does not replicate many of the faults of the past. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Our next speaker, as we've heard, is the CEO of the government's policy think tank, Niti Aayog. We're thrilled to have BVR Subramaniam with us. The thinking arm of the government is how one of our correspondents in Delhi described Niti to me yesterday. I hope that's fair. Before this appointment, BVR served as Commerce Secretary. He will speak for a few minutes now. I'll then get a chance to sit him down here and throw a few questions of my own at him. BVR, come on up. Welcome.
Thank you, Axel. Lord Mayor, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Niti Aayog. I'm extremely happy to be with all of you here today, talking about sustainable infrastructure and the cooperation that is possible between the UK and India in making this happen. As I briefly mentioned, Niti Aayog is the think tank of the government. We are the people who look beyond the horizon, beyond the 1-2 year time frames, look far into the future. The think tank actually works and works quite effectively. I actually say we are the, India has this Indian Institutes of Technology, which are very, very famous. So I changed that acronym. I said, Niti Aayog is the IIT of the government. It ideates, it incubates, and then transfers it to a department to go ahead and do it. We don't actually dirty our hands in doing it, but a lot of things have to be ideated. And a lot of things have been done. We have the, Production Linked Incentives Scheme, PLI scheme for industries, that came out of Niti Aayog. The National Mission on E-Mobility actually is housed in Niti Aayog. The Green Hydrogen Mission was done here. We actually focus heavily on infrastructure and monitor it and push the envelope there on behalf of the Prime Minister for the rest of the government. We do the asset monetization, monitoring it, pushing departments into monetizing assets which can be harvested for revenues which can then be reinvested. So it's actually the center of action. I'm extremely happy to be here today. London is the center for global finance. It funnels money, as the Lord Mayor was saying, to projects, countries around the world, using its talent and its expertise. You have tremendous expertise. You are very good at structuring projects, at managing risks, at enabling capital flows which are potentially there to make them happen. And you're very skilled in frontier areas, be it green finance, be it other areas. So I think, given that background, the possibility that is there, which the City of London, which is a unique place as far as this concentration of expertise is concerned, can do for the transformation of India is immense. Let me talk a bit about India, and I think my previous speakers have made my job easier, both the High Commissioner and Mr. Ladva, about the potential of India. India is at a very unique juncture in its history. It's at a cusp of transformative change, at a point where its trajectory, as far as economic growth is concerned, is going to be quite different from that in the past. And it's at an inflection point, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is simple. We have crossed a certain per capita income level, after which countries see phenomenal accelerated growth. That's one point. The second is, we have solved, or are at the verge of solving, the problems of the past century. What were the problems of the past 50, 75 years? It's about basic access to services like drinking water, electricity, connectivity, rural roads, what we in Hindi call roti, kapda, makan, that is, food, clothing, shelter, you can add connectivity and drinking water and electricity to that. Those are on the verge of being actually resolved in the next 2-3 years. Having done that, it's time for India to actually not only accelerate its growth, for which the foundation is now very strongly laid, but also to aspire to solve the problems of this century and not think about the problems of the past century. That actually requires a huge change in the way in which governments are actually working to solve problems. Think about what are the next set of challenges this nation has to do. The other is, there's been a demographic transition that is happening in India. I mean, we are a very youthful nation. I mentioned the number yesterday. Over 700 million people in India are below 30 years. For the next 30 years, about 20% of the working age population in the world will be from India. So when large countries around the world are actually seeing aging populations, here is a youthful nation which actually will provide the engine for growth for the global economy. I mean, I was just reading yesterday that about 60% of India's contribution to incremental growth next year will be 60% of what the United States incremental growth is. So that's the scale in terms of, so the net of India on the global platform is going to be quite large. I mean, we are now, the 5th largest economy, but we are probably, unless there's something dramatic that happens, going to be the 3rd largest economy in about 4-5 years' time. As the UK High Commissioner to India mentioned yesterday, India, China, and the United States. These are the large economies that are going to matter in the next 20-25 years. Our own GDP share in the world has gone up from about 1.1% just 20 years ago to about 3.5% now, and it's rising fast. We are increasingly visible now on the global stage, be it the G20, where we are the president, be it the UN, be it other fora, and as a responsible nation, responsible of its obligations to the welfare of the world, which our Prime Minister keeps saying, one earth, one people, one planet. We are one, so we need to work together. It's also not just the economy and the market which is attractive. This is a country which has demonstrated its technical capabilities. And I think that's something remarkable for a developing country, be it space, be it the digital world, be it the public infrastructure we have created on the digital side. This is something phenomenal. So I think in many areas, India is not only a diverse economy, but it exists on the frontiers of innovation. And I think that's something which is a matter of pride for us. And even for the rest of the world, I think India matters. They're looking at India with a lot of interest and waiting for India to deliver. And deliver not only because of its demography, also because of geopolitics. You're quite aware the way the world is heading, in the recent past. And also, the Indian model of development is actually a very relevant model for large parts of the global south. A country of its size trying to do a transformation in a democratic way is something which is unprecedented in world history. 1 billion people seeking their future through a democratic institutional framework is something which is remarkable, and I think that's a matter to be proud of. Having said that, it's while this journey is something to be proud about, it's not an accident. It's happened because it's got a government which is determined, which is strong-willed, which looks far into the future, doesn't get diverted by short-term issues. One eye is always on the long term. And I think that's the stability in the focus in our policies which is there. The focus is on growth, the focus is on capital expenditure, and the focus is on jobs. And I think I give the credit to the Prime Minister that irrespective of the daily ups and downs that are there in the life of a nation, one eye is constantly fixed on the long term. And I think as somebody working in my organization with him, I think my job is to keep that eye on the long term. And if you see the Indian budgets, as my predecessor said, India didn't splurge money when the COVID happened. It stuck to its knitting, and we are saved because our inflation didn't shoot up like the rest of the world because there's not too much free money flowing around in India. But if you see the Indian budgets for the last 5 years, the tilt that has been there, where revenue expenditure has been cut down and capital expenditure has shot up, there's a complete rebalancing of the Indian budget. So that's there. And most important, it's a government which believes that the private sector is the engine of growth. And I think that's something very, very important. There's a firm belief at all levels of government that the growth of India, be it industry or infrastructure, has to be driven by the private sector, by private capital. In fact, this government has announced something most revolutionary, where it has actually, India had, 50 years ago, the public sector was called, the dominant heights of the Indian economy, that the temples of modern India were public sector undertakings. They've gone out and firmly stated a policy by which they've said that barring a few strategic sectors, the government shall not be in the play in most sectors. And they are very clear about privatizing firms. I mean, Air India is a good example of a firm which multiple governments in the past tried to sell off, but this is the first government which has actually done it. And there are many more in the pipeline. And I think the willingness to put the idea on the table and commit themselves to it is something which is remarkable. Having said that, India's infrastructure needs are going to be humongous. A lot of numbers were quoted in front of me, but it's humongous because of the size and scale of the magnitude. The country is planning to go from a $3 trillion economy 25 years down the line to reach about 30 trillion. But what we are trying to do in about 20 years, it's like building what the United States has built over 150 years in a short span of 20 years. So the scale and magnitude of the effort that is needed, not only in actually doing the projects, but identifying them, financing them, building them, operationalizing them, it's a huge, huge challenge. It's a huge institutional challenge, it's a huge funding challenge, it's a huge intellectual challenge. The government of India is putting its money where its mouth is. In this budget, it's a phenomenal, but $120 billion have been put into capital expenditure. In the last 5 years, we've moved up capex by about 6 times as far as the central government's budget is. State governments are being incentivized to put money, but I think that's not enough. The High Commissioner has mentioned, we have a national infrastructure pipeline, which has about $1.3 trillion of projects. I think at least 1/3 of it has to be met by private capital. And I think that's where it's important that we work, and that's the conversation I'm having with the City of London and the Lord Mayor. How can we use the expertise of London, the capabilities it has in structuring finance to fill the gap in India's financing needs? A lot of it is in energy, a lot of it is in transportation, which is roads, which is in railways. A lot of it is in urban, not just transport, but in urban housing, developing cities, and also in water. So these are the big areas where this is there. Lots of capital flows are needed in the coming decades. And we have set up some institutional frameworks. We have a national bank for financing infrastructure development. India has a mismatch of the funds that are available and the demand for that, the asset liability mismatch. We don't have long-term funds on the scale on which the country needs that. So I think there is scope for that. The national monetization pipeline is something which I'm driving, that the government has taken a very firm decision that if you have assets which are mature, offload them into the market, get the revenues, and then use it for other things. And India is also on the verge of a massive digital transformation. We call it the Digital India movement, be it the unique identity where everybody has a unique identity through the biometrics, be it our payment systems, which we call UPI. It's the fastest in the world and cheap. We have got DigiLocker. So entire thing which we call the India stack is coming into place. And we see this is going to be very disruptive in future as far as, pushing digitalization into the general global population is concerned. Having said that, seeing the size of the Indian economy, the needs that are going to be there, I think it's useful if the United Kingdom and India partner with each other into setting up a permanent mechanism by which we can actually enable capital flows to happen. And why it's important is because the devil is in the details. It's easy to make broad statements. You can, read articles, write articles, but how do you make it happen on the ground? That's important. And that's why I believe that we need to create a mechanism which can actually navigate the waters, identify projects, structure them, manage the risk, enable funding to happen, and then let them actually happen. It's not easy. 10 days ago, I was in a big conference where people were trying to look at a lot of projects and other stuff, capex, etc. India has a shortage of contractors. And I've actually been tasked with actually creating a new pool of contractors to do construction work in India. Because given the scale of work that is there, I think the local contracting capabilities are actually inadequate. So actually, if we bring together the best minds that are there in London with the best ministries with a lot of demand for capital in India, we can work out a roadmap, we can identify issues, de-bottleneck them, and enable the private sector on both sides, the finance, legal on one side, the implementers and operators on the other side, bring them together, we play the matchmaker. I'm sure that sky is the limit. There are many challenges that need to be handled, and I don't want to go into a list of them. It could be tax related, it could be policy stability, it could be manpower related, it could be the legal system and bankruptcy systems that are there in India, it's private sector capacities. But I'm sure if we have a mechanism by which conversations happen in a very focused manner, outcome oriented, we can deliver a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, BVR. And as I said, I want to spend a little bit of time, haven't got that much time, but a little bit of time going over a few of those points. So thank you for your thoughts. Look, the investment is there, we've heard that. The investment need is there, the money is there, the opportunity is there. We just need to make this happen now. You talk about a permanent mechanism to allow capital flows to happen. I imagine that's going to be among the ideas you take back to the government. How optimistic are you that this can happen quite quickly?
Oh, I'm a person who works to very heavy deadlines and very tight deadlines. And I'm sure in the Lord Mayor here, we have somebody who's very keen to make it happen. We are looking at a time frame of a couple of months to get a mechanism into place, pick up some low-hanging fruit, get some things demonstrated on the ground quickly, identify the process that is required to get this to happen. And once we have done one or two of them, then it'll expand rapidly, and I'm sure the match will be a hit.
Okay. Well, that sounds optimistic, and that sounds positive. You talked at the end, or you mentioned challenges. You didn't want to go through all of the challenges, because there are many. But give us an idea of what more you think needs to be done to get the impetus going, to get things moving, to get private investors on board, perhaps, for example, in the way of land reform in India.
Okay. So broad, let me answer it in three parts. I was addressing a global gathering of Standard Chartered in Mumbai about 15 days ago. And I was talking to their chief economist, and he probably either from London or Dubai, and I heard something interesting. He says, India as it looks from outside is quite different from the India as it looks from inside. And he said, India, as far as financing and FDI, FPI is concerned, actually has a PR problem. It has a very poor public relations issue, which actually needs to be tackled. And I think that's one of the easier things. When people get to travel and meet more, they'll do better. Secondly, there are many challenges. What I think is the biggest hurdle is the capacity on our side to structure projects and deals which actually meet the requirements of private sector investors. That's a lot of capability that has to be built up domestically. That'll take a while, that'll take a few years. And I think that's where something like the City of London would come in, where they already have the expertise. So they bring that in from their end, and once the deals are done, then we are off the ground. Land, by land reforms, I presume you're talking of land acquisition. Yeah. Now, the government has actually changed its policies. It's come out with a new program, or not a program, a convergence system called Gati Shakti, which has actually cut down time for preparing and identifying projects by an order of magnitude, 10, 12. So I've actually heard of road projects which earlier used to take, say, a year and a half to two, getting actually through in 2 to 3 months. So I think those bottlenecks are being resolved.
How might the ongoing free trade negotiations between the UK and India impact the scope and the scale of investments by the UK into India? Will any deal, for example, and I know you were involved when this started, lay out a thorough investment chapter that provides some clear guidelines, clearer guidelines than are available now? Okay,
I think there is an agreement on both sides that the investment treaty will be outside the FTA, but will be concluded simultaneously. That's there. Having an investment agreement would certainly give a level of comfort for investment flows. Having said that, investment flows happen with or without investment treaties. That's for sure, because money is fungible. I mean, yesterday I was mentioning that the United States inflows into India are more than India's inflows into the United States, but doesn't mean that's the only flow. US money is coming through Mauritius, it's coming through Singapore. So I'm sure UK money can find its way to India to multiple channels, but having an investment treaty would help the direct flows. And I think both sides are keen on having something clinched.
Who wants this FTA more, would you say?
I think it's a win-win for both sides, and I'm being very, very honest. India had been reticent about getting into FTAs in the past. So you can see that we're taking baby steps, ginger steps in actually moving ahead. The fact that the two sides agreed to launch it, I think it was January last year, the negotiations, meant that India was convinced that it's going to have some benefits. And I think on the UK side, it's equally convinced that given the potential of the Indian economy, there are going to be benefits. The benefits are going to be distributed differently on both sides. I mean, for India, it's the beginning, it'll be largely on the merchandise side. For UK, I guess the bulk of the benefits will flow in, barring whiskey and cars, largely in services, because that's the strength of the economy. So it's a match made in heaven, two economies with complementary strengths.
Yep.
So the FTA is equally good.
I didn't expect anything less diplomatic than that answer, by the way.
But it's not easy doing an FTA with India, I'm sure.
It's probably not easy doing one with the UK either.
The former chief negotiator is there, he's moved to Bombay. But my own understanding is there's a high degree of political convergence. FTAs happen when there is political convergence. The last, bridging the last mile has to be done when the political leaders decide this has to happen. I've seen these things, 9 pins toppling in a week, and then things happen. It's going to happen.
I've got a couple more bits and pieces I want to ask you. You talked a little bit about sectors at the end, and you talked about cities and the infrastructure. I want to delve a little bit more into the sectors, and you mentioned water. Where are the biggest opportunities, would you say, for investors here in the UK right now in India?
Okay, if you look at infrastructure, the biggest would be potentially railways, but railways is a very tough nut to crack because it's complex. So I wouldn't pick that up. I would put up urban as one. I mean, urban in our estimation is going to require a couple of $1 trillion in the next 20 years. So it's not urban just transport, complete transformation. India is going to see a doubling of its urban population in the next 25 years. We're going to move from something about 400 million to about 800 million. It's one of the largest movements that's going to happen in India. Even then in 2047, 50% of India would still be rural. But 800 million people, new cities, you can imagine Delhi yesterday, we're talking about 30 million. Delhi is going to probably be a 60 million size city. And same with there'll be 20 cities of 15, 20 million size. Huge opportunity there. But simultaneously, roads, huge. Yep. And then airports. We have about 100 plus. There are plans for about 400. So it's a huge opportunity on airports in India.
Is it, and I think of the flooding in Bengaluru, we hear similar stories, in terms of infrastructure and the difficulties in Mumbai. Would you say it's more this sort of, the opportunity is more on the tech infrastructure side or more the physical infrastructure, the smart cities, transport networks, etc.?
I think it's more on the physical side.
Okay.
It's huge because given where we are in our levels of development, this infrastructure was not there. So it's not a question of renewing infrastructure, it's actually of building infrastructure in most places for the first time. I mean, when Delhi was building its metro 30 years ago, I mean, it was something new. Today we have 30 cities in India which are building metros, and this is going to expand rapidly as these cities grow. So you can take area after area in urban India. There's going to be a huge additionality. A lot of this is not replacement, it's for the first time.
Yep.
So there's huge opportunity. Having said that, I'm not repeating the tech story because it's a very well-known story. So, Bangalore and being Bangalore is so well-known. I don't want to talk about that because I think that has found its place in the global marketplace. So let it happen. I think benign neglect is good for our tech sector.
Yeah, okay. I mentioned at the start the Prime Minister's trip to the US, and I'd like to get your take on this. I know we're talking UK-India today, but I read a quote, this is not a routine visit, this is a fundamental turning point between India and the US. That came from a senior fellow at the Asia Society Policy Institute in Delhi. How significant a turning point was that trip to India? How should the rest of the world look at that trip to India and the burgeoning relationship between India and the US? And should the UK maybe worry about it a little bit?
Now, I think the optics of the visit explained it all. The statements by the US President and the Indian Prime Minister explained there is no fundamental shift, but this is the coming together of two nations which were destined to come together. Two large democracies, the old one, the largest one. It had to happen. It didn't happen in the 50s, 60s, but I've seen this movement happening since the 90s onwards, so it's come together. So I think there is an inexorable movement. This is a relationship which is very strong on all the three legs, even one of which makes countries happy. There's strong people to people, strong business to business, and strong government to government. There is no way that relationship will not go and become stronger. Coming to the UK, I don't think there is any reason for UK to worry. The big thing is UK has to leverage its strengths and build up its own relationship with India. It should not be benchmarked against the US.
Right.
And that's why, for example, I'm here today. The City of London and its capability in generating capital is something which is unique. It should not compare itself with New York.
No.
But the fact is the Indian comfort level in the UK is far more than elsewhere.
But the way things are going, the way it seems, and I think of what Janet Yellen said as well on the infrastructure investment side, you might be spoiled for choice soon. You're gonna make decisions. When you go back to see the Prime Minister with your messages from your visit here, will you go back and say, as the Lord Mayor asserted in his open, the UK is the partner of choice now? Is that something you can hold your head up and your hand up and say, the UK is the partner of choice?
First of all, we won't be spoiled for choice because, as is used the word, the demands of India are going to be humongous. So I think there's place for all. Second, I think as far as capital flows and generating this is concerned, in terms of investment for infrastructure, UK is the partner of choice. Its strengths are huge. There's such a huge history there. It's just a question of, have we been active enough? And I think the UK has a PR problem on finance as far as India is concerned. There has to be a more aggressive push into Indian markets, which was probably missing.
Okay, Divya, I've got to stop it there. I could go on for a lot longer, but thank you so very much indeed for answering my question.
Thanks a lot, Axel.
Thank you so much.